Hi again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about careers in music with you today. I feel I've been really lucky to be able to have a career in music and be successful in what I do, and not all musicians are, in all honesty. So just a little bit about myself. I started off, of course, just like you. I was in my school orchestra, and I really loved it. I thought playing viola was awesome. I started on violin actually when I was in fifth grade, and I was terrible. I actually bowed behind the bridge, like in between the tailpiece and the bridge. And I remember the person next to me said, "Wow, you're terrible at that." And I was like, "I'll show you." And so, that's kind of my personality. I love a dare. And I took up the violin because I was going to show that little girl that I could play violin really well. Well, I ended up not playing violin really well. I ended up actually being like last chair, second violin in sixth grade orchestra. And I remember my director saying, "Hey, do you want to try viola?" And I was like, "Well, nothing can be worse than last chair, second violin." So I was like, "Sure, let's go for it." And I just fell in love with the instrument. And I think that just says a lot about finding something that you really like, I also really like cello, which I later studied in college, but that was a big turning point for me. I started taking my first private lessons when I was in eighth grade, and I was just a really hard worker. I don't think I was especially talented or, smart, but I do think that I was very disciplined, and I was willing to put in the time for what I wanted. And I'm happy to say that by the time I was 17, I ended up placing first place in nationals and third place in the world. And that was a real big highlight of my career. And I actually thought I was going to go on to be a soloist. And what was interesting is when I went to college for viola performance, I ended up getting tendinitis all on the left side of my body, and I actually couldn't play for about 4 months. And we used to have this joke between me and my string quartet that we would never teach, that if you couldn't play, you were a teacher. And that was kind of the moment when I was like, uh-oh, I have all my gigs lined up, all my concerts that are going to pay my rent, and I can't actually perform any of them. And I ended up taking my first teaching job at that point. And that was another huge turning point because I absolutely fell in love with teaching. I knew I had found a home when I got there, and I ended up getting a lot of education in kinesiology and Alexander technique and all sorts of other things to really make me the teacher that I am today. But prior to that, I had played principal viola with almost every orchestra I had ever worked with. I was principal violist of the All Nationals Orchestra and played in front of Congress in Washington, D.C. I played in a bunch of pre-professional youth orchestras, La Jolla Symphony, all sorts of places. And I think that definitely when I was younger, I thought that you had really three options. You were a soloist, you were an orchestral musician, or I guess you were a teacher. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized that there are so many different professions that you can go into. It's like insane, actually. So one of the courses that we had to take, Music 101, like literally there was a Music 101, and it was called Your Career in Music. And basically what it was every day or every class meeting, we would have a professional come in and talk about what their job was like. And we had, of course, symphony musicians, we had composers, we had orchestral contractors, we had arrangers, we had music therapists, we had buskers, which are street musicians, that have a little hat with tip please. And, it was so interesting to see all the different varieties of musicians that you could have. My teacher in college was actually first call for studio work. And studio work is where you will go into, let's say, Warner Brothers soundstage or Sony Pictures soundstage, and you will be called to play I don't know, for the soundtrack of Lord of the Rings or, some Marvel movie. And you would literally sight read it, and that was your job. And my teacher was first call for that. So he gave me a huge education in sight reading. And as a result, I'm a great sight reader these days, too. But those guys, even back in the early 2000s, got paid $450 an hour, which I don't even know what it is now. But it's a lot more than that, I'll tell you that much. But they have the ability to sit down, see music for the very first time, and just sight read it. And literally they hit record, and that's what goes on the movie. Would you believe that when you hear a movie that you would think, oh, the orchestra rehearsed it over and over and over weeks, if not months. But the reality is that they literally sat down, they played it, and that's what went on the movie. So that's a career in being a studio musician. Of course, there's freelance musician, which means that you are not part of an orchestra. You just find gigs. Maybe you play weddings around town. Maybe you get to choose whatever it is that you'd like to do. And I think that's a very freeing career path, because I think part of my experience with being a professional musician is that sometimes you don't get to play the pieces that really move you and that you really are interested in. You have to play them because that's what's being sold at the concert. And as a freelancer, you get to choose the projects that you work on. Of course, I spent a long time as a chamber musician. I played with the Goldberg String Quartet, and we played on National Public Radio Live. That was great. If you really love kind of like that union between being a soloist and being an orchestral musician, I think there's nothing better. You get your solos, and there's only one on a part, so you feel really, really important. But at the same time, you get that safety of being in a group and that camaraderie of being in a group. I did spend a little bit of time as an orchestra contractor. What they do is, remember those studio musicians I was talking about earlier? They actually work with the budgets for the film. And so the filmmaker and composer will come up to you and say, hey, we have $50,000 or we have $100,000, and we need you to hire an orchestra for this many hours or this many days, and we have this many minutes of music to record and make it happen. And so your job is to call everybody and arrange the dates and get lunch for everyone and then take a percentage of everyone's fees. But it's a very, very stressful job, but that's what you're there to do. And anyone who can't cut it and can't sight read well enough, you have to fire them. So that's the other unfortunate part about that job. But if you ever look at movie credits, you'll always see orchestra contractor. I also spent a little bit of time in San Francisco. I was a music producer for an independent film company called Five Fingers Productions. And we worked a lot with independent filmmakers and artists. And my job was to take a piece and augment it, make it better. It was kind of funny because oftentimes I'd work with, let's say, a singer who didn't know how to read music. And I'd have to transcribe or write down what it is that they were singing and turn it into sheet music. So then I could send it to a pianist and then they could accompany them. Or I'd have to, tweak something on Pro Tools or, GarageBand, right? As far as how to make it sound better or to adjust the levels of echo or resonance or whatever it had to be. And that's a really interesting career too, especially if maybe you don't want to play on a stage. If you understand music and you understand aesthetics and what's beautiful, but you also love technology, that could be a really, really great career path. Music therapy, that was an emerging field in my time, and now it's booming. And, if you graduate in music therapy, you could, start at $60,000 a year right out of college. And a lot of hospitals and, different psychologist offices do hire music therapists. And their job is to use music to help people communicate their emotions, to grieve, to help with learning disabilities or mental disabilities. From what I understand, I haven't done it, but I do have a lot of friends in the industry who really find it's quite rewarding. So if you have an interest in psychology, And then, of course, music, and you want to use music to help, let's say, children with autism be able to express themselves or be able to communicate, or have people with Alzheimer's be able to, speak again, or recall their memories. It's magical, and you can see a lot of almost like miracle videos on YouTube if you look them up. Of course, your music teacher at school is a conductor, and of course there's conductors of symphony orchestras, and that tends to be the highest station of being a musician. So conductor has to know how to play fundamentally all of the instruments that they do conduct. So believe it or not, your conductor at school knows how to play all of your instruments, as well as all the wind instruments. And if that doesn't boggle your mind, it should. It is a very difficult position, and that person has a lot of responsibility, as well as has to have the knowledge to lead others who have mastered their instrument. You could be a professor at a college or a university. Of course, heading any type of subject study. You could be a professor of music history. You could be a professor of music theory, music technology, music therapy, industry studies, violin, viola, cello, bass. The list goes on. And there are so many different positions to fill. One thing to know about being a professor is that you are required to do active research. So that means whether you write a book or you cut a CD, or you publish a paper in a professional journal. Those are the types of things that you would be responsible for, as well as, of course, teaching the next generation of artists. And then, of course, music teacher. That's what I do. I really enjoy working with the pre-college age. I find that it's a formative age where there's a lot of guidance needed, and I feel that that's my calling. That's really the age group or the demographic that I really enjoy working with. And in that, private teacher goes along with that. And then the last thing I would say that I can think of off the top of my head would be being a composer or being an arranger. And of course, we all know who composers are. They're your Mozarts, your Beethovens, your Hans Zimmers, your Danny Elfmans. They're anyone who writes music for any purpose. And it doesn't have to be classical. It could be jazz. It could be for scoring for a movie. It could be for a video game. They all have composers, and music does tell that story that can't necessarily be communicated in words or dialogue or images. And an arranger is someone who takes previously written music and rescores it for other forces. So, for example, if you have a really cool hip-hop song, and you want to rescore it for string quartet, that's what an arranger would do. And if you've heard of the Vitamin String Quartet, which is based out of LA, one of my quartet mates, the second violinist in my old quartet, actually plays with them now. And I was invited to do some arranging for some of their songs. So actually, if you go on YouTube and you look up, what's that song? It's by Sia. I can't even think of it now. But I did an arrangement for the Vitamin String Quartet, and it was a Sia song. So, literally the music careers that you can have are endless. And, as far as being a symphony musician, I will say that you do have to work on stamina. I think it's a physically demanding job, as funny as that sounds, because you sit in a chair, but it can sometimes be extremely painful and laborious, having to sit in a chair for hours and hours and hours. So, really understand how to hold your body, and how to monitor your energy, because oftentimes, you're expected to do 3 to 4 hours rehearsal, 6 days a week. And then you have 3 services or 3 concerts, Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday matinee in the afternoon. And, that's your job. Symphony jobs are rare. You only, let's say, have 12 violas in a section, and if all 12 are filled, you're out of luck. So oftentimes, we say that winning an audition for an orchestra is like winning the lottery, because it's not necessarily that, every other musician who's not in a symphony is a bad musician. It's just that there are only so many positions and there are a lot of people to fill them. So, it's not a funny joke, but we often joke that, to have an opening, someone has to die first. And that, in all honesty, that is true, sadly. But, being an orchestral musician, you get to play some of the most beautiful music ever written. I mean, in all honesty, you get to learn to work as part of a team and really come up with a cohesive sound versus a soloistic sound. So understanding that the great many of you are what's important, not just you. So if you are a good candidate for an orchestral career, you'd be someone who is willing to put yourself on the back burner for the sake of, let's say, your section, or let's say the sake of the orchestra. You're a person who loves collaboration. You're a person who really wants to experience kind of that safety of that group and that consistency of having a stable income as well as consistent colleagues. I think most other careers in music, there's a lot of movement and change. So if you like a lot of adaptability, if you like to be a little bit more the star of the show, you might do well in any of the other careers. But orchestral musician is definitely a worthwhile career and something that I think that you should consider if you are considering a career in music, as well as all of the many other careers that I've mentioned. All right. I hope that helps and that you may have been enlightened to some ideas of career paths that you may not have thought of before. Thank you.